Hi folks, thought I'd try something a little different today. I've got the shaper here and I made some major progress. I've got I want to show you how I put it together, some of the intricacies and interesting parts. I'll move the camera around a little bit. I've got the camera in a little, it's an iPhone camera, it's in a little holder connected to a chunk of pipe, and very low-tech camera stand here. But it's interesting, I got the yoke installed and the yoke bearing supports, got the holes drilled last night and I put them in. These are 5/16 18 round head bolts instead of hex head. I just thought I'd use the round head because I thought that they looked good. That's what I used over here on the bearing support. And so anyway, they're installed. It fits nice. My object here today is to put everything back together, and I thought it'd be interesting to show the video of the gear, the bull gear, and the slide assembly, and how that goes together, because it's a little tricky. Originally, the bull gear was held onto this shaft in the medical machine that Alan and I rescued years ago, and it used a roll pin in here. And I was going to use the roll pin originally, and then I realized, I'm going to have to take this thing apart several times before I'm actually done and ready to operate the machine. So I replaced the roll pin with a piece of 1032 threaded rod, which is 3/16 inch. And then I realized, well, that's not going to be very good for the long run. So I had a piece of 3/16 inch stainless, which I just threaded the ends of 1032, and I just test fitted it. Snug, but it fits good inside there. So that's what I'm going to do first. I'll have to put the gear inside the machine here, and then I can hold the shaft up to it and tighten the shaft using these nut drivers here, if you can see those. So I thought I'd capture that on video. Once that's done, then I can replace the bearing support here and this side, and the little this will be replaced later, but just a little stop that'll ride on the end of the shaft there. So I'll put those on for now, and then I'll come around the other side and show. I might as well talk about it now. Inside the bearings, the yoke assembly here, this is how Gingery describes making it. The one addition, if you can see this little brass ring I put up here on the outside, that in order for the slide block to spin freely, it needs to be shorter than the shoulder part of the bolt. And what I mean is that's 3/4 of an inch. The plans call for this to be 3/4 of an inch thick or deep, whichever you want to call it. And I could just mill some off of it, but I needed to add a spacer anyway, and I thought, well, instead of using washers, I've got a lathe and the capability to make a custom spacer. So I turned this out of brass. I could always replace it with steel. I did shorten the depth of the block so that I could use washers, and as you can see, I did end up cutting a little bit off the end of the shoulder bolt there. So I'll put that together last and kind of show how that fits. The object is to get everything back together, and then you'll see I do have room for the driving gear here, and I'm still playing around with different ideas in my mind about how that will be. I mean, clearly it's going to be on some kind of a shaft, but I don't know if I'm going to have bearing supports and the pulley over on this side or coming out this side. We'll just need to see how that goes. So put it back together today, and the next thing will be to build the ram clamp assembly that will go underneath the ram. I've got the ram sitting off to the side over here, just waiting its turn to get reassembled. So the ram clamp will go on the bottom of that. And if you want to see what I'm talking about, look at Maker Size. A guy named Cressel Anderson did a fantastic job documenting his building of the Gingery shaper, and I got to give Cressel a ton of credit because he's the one that motivated me to get started on this project. Basically, I'd finished the locomotive over there, and I saw Cressel's work, and I'm like, man, I would build that shaper that I've been thinking about for so many years. So without further ado, let me try putting the camera here, and I'll try to do as much as possible, get this on camera for you. So here is the bull gear, and I need to take the shaft out, set that down there. I'm going to set the bull gear in place here inside the shaper. It's showing it pretty good. This is going to be a long video, a lot longer than I normally post, but hopefully it'll be enjoyable. Now, I can see the hole. You can't see it, but I can see the hole for the through. This is the original one, how the shaft was. This is the original size of the shaft, and I turned it down. I showed some pictures on Instagram about that. This is the hole now that the shaft will go through. So I put the shaft in place. Alright. And feed the rod in. Let's see. It's a snug fit. I'll put the little lock washer on that before it goes in. It does not just slip in. I had to tap it in with a little brass hammer before. I may have to do that again. So be patient. If you're an impatient person, you might want to fast forward, because this is going to take me some time, but it's pretty interesting. Now I'm twisting the bull gear. You can see the hole. That's the hole it goes through. I don't know if it's lined up or not. There we go. It's lined up. Goes through pretty well. I even ran some reamers through here. It's always going to be snug when you're drilling a couple of holes that you go through two different spaces. So I even ran it through with reamers, and the reamers went through okay. But I'm going to tap it home there. There we go. Alright, so the 3/16 inch stainless steel rod is through. Here it is sticking out. Hopefully you can see it right there. I'm going to put a little nut on it. Let's see. Oh my, where'd the little nut go? Well, I've got more. Oh, here we go. It's on the old threaded rod. This is a different size. That's why I have two different nut drivers here. Now when I get ready to put this thing together for its final assembly, I'm sure I'll put some Loctite on these things, but right now I've got lock washers. And when I originally conceived of this, I was thinking, well, I've got some green Loctite, which is awesome. It'll never come apart, basically, without massive heat and force. I was going to put the green Loctite on there, but now that I see, I'm like, I don't think so. Green Loctite will be way too strong. Look at that, I can't get the nut driver on that thing, so that's okay. I will get a wrench, or I could cheat. I got some wrenches the proper size. Let me go ahead and get those. Again, if you're an impatient person and you're used to my 2 and 3 minute videos, this is going to be not your cup of tea, but since I never show, what I'm doing right now, I've got some little Sears ignition wrenches. These things are awesome, and they're perfect for a lot of the work that I did on the locomotive. So I've got several sets of these things. There we go, that's the right size. And what's the right size for the little one? Is that it? Nope. This one probably. Yep, I'll do. Just about symmetric size. That nut driver fits it, so I'm going to tighten up. Hopefully we can kind of equalize. But I was real happy that I had some of that stainless steel 3/16 inch rod around to the rod. Obviously the threaded rod would probably hold, provide adequate support, but thinking about machine design and so forth, it's just not a good idea to have a threaded portion across the whole span, bearing weight and stuff. Way better to have a solid rod there. I'm certainly no engineer, but just observing how things are made and put together, it seems like the way that a professional would do it. So I'm trying to do it as professionally as possible. So tighten this up. Leave a few threads on protruding from either side. And just bear with me because it won't be long now before we get this nice and tight. And then I can put the column support on and it'll look like something. There you go. I can start tightening them both equally. Excellent. Okay, that's nice and snug. It's not going anywhere. The little lock washers are holding it. Now I'll take the column support and I mark the top with a little blue T so I know which is which. I did have to shorten one side. I shortened this one bolt that goes in this side when I built it. And now, let me turn the video around. You can see. There we go. Put this over the shaft. One other thing I need to remember to do is drill a hole here for an oil reservoir. Shoot. I was going to show you the there's a little space in between the two bearings in there, so I'm going to put a piece of felt in and have a little oil reservoir, which Gingery calls for. Okay, so we'll get it lined up. Kind of like putting a brake assembly back on a car or something. Just carefully feel your way around and line things up as good as you can. Start putting them in finger tight. And I dumped out a bunch of these little bolts. These are, for the keen-eyed viewer, if you can see, these are actually quarter 20 round heads that I put in here. What Gingery calls for is 4 5/16 18 bolts to hold this cover plate on. I thought, since I have a rotary table and the ability to do 6 holes very evenly spaced, that would look a heck of a lot better and provide more uniform support, so that's what I did. I think this thing is going to look awesome. Hopefully it'll work as good as it looks. My idea, kind of tipping my hand, is that the machined aluminum solid block parts look really awesome like they are, and my idea is probably to seal and paint the cast part, the cast body of it. I think that'd be pretty cool. Alright, well, I'm not gonna belabor the video. While I look for the missing screws, I'll come back around. I dropped a couple, or just one of them. I guess it went underneath the table that I'm at. Just tighten these babies up hand tight. And alright, now I'm going to pull the shaft all the way out. So this, see, this will move back and forth now, and it's very good clearance with everything. The other thing I was worried about, hard to see, but there's a set screw that comes out of the bottom down here, and I was a little concerned about the gear interfering with it. Yeah, see, it will if it's pushed out that way. Maybe to shorten that set screw, but as long as the shaft is all the way out, which is the way I've basically designed everything, and that's the purpose of this little, this is an old, I forget what you call these things, but basically a collar. Just pull it out, tighten that up, just hand tight for now. Okay, so that ain't going anywhere, and that'll, it's just a little snug, but the inside of the top hat, if you will, of the gear is rubbing against a bronze bearing that's just like this. Let me show you. Cast bronze bearing, which, by the way, you can buy those at Tractor Supply for a couple dollars. That's where I got these. Alright, so there we go. Alright, looking good, nice and smooth. Now we can come around the opposite side, and I'll put the guide block in place. Get these reamers out of the way. And hopefully you can see things inside now. There's the bull gear, the slide yoke assembly, everything rotating nice. And basically the next thing, and the only thing that's left to do, is to put the guide block back in, and this uses a little hex size hex wrench to tighten it up. And of course we need the slide. This is the actual nut, the slide nut that goes in. You can see I filed it a little bit and rounded the edges, countersunk it just a little bit so there's no burrs. It's all quite smooth. So what I've been doing is to put the bull gear horizontal. It's a lot easier that way. Then I can just slide the nut in and then move the arm over. There we go. And make sure we got that oriented properly. The little brass thing is on there. Put this in, and then I just push this over till the bolt is about centered on there. Okay, and I'll put it in finger tight, and then slide this down. Slide that to the top. And I made a little mark. See where the blue ink is and the little dot? That's the maximum throw. So the top right there at the maximum throw. And I'll tighten this up. That's the wrong size X wrench. Hold it tight, snug that up a little bit. Alright, so now we should be good to go. You can see the action moving. Hopefully that's not too dizzying. It'll go a little bit more, the throw. And one thing, I might as well point this out to the keen-eyed viewer that has read the Gingery book. The book calls for putting the screw heads on the front side. I just messed up when I built this thing, and I don't think it's going to make a material difference. If it does at all, it would be with the throw, with the screw head hitting the back here, back crossbar. Sorry. So I may need to, worst comes to worst, I may make a little notch in this crossbar here so that screw head will not interfere, but it's not worth redoing everything. I had put marks and other indications and things on here. I really don't want to mess with it, so whoops. Alright. I keep hitting the... Alright. So, there we go. We're good to go. Excellent. So, let me give you another video of the gear in operation. And it's pretty much centered right now. There's plenty of room. One thing I was worried about was with the gear being so wider than the chain drive, would it make this thing be too far that way, the crank yoke, but it's not. And you can see there's actually room. I could put spacers and washers to move it over a little bit further even. So what will control this is the ram guide that I need to build yet that will go underneath the ram. And there is clearance for the ram. So speaking of, let me go grab the ram now. Try to do this one-handed. This is going to be interesting. I don't know if I'm able to do this or not, y'all. Give is not in the right spot. I have the gib adjusted just right, and I really don't want to loosen. There we go. there's no oil on anything, but alright, so yes, I got the ram inside there now, and you can see, yep, there's just enough clearance. There's supposed to be an 1/8 inch of clearance between the top of the yoke and the bottom of the ram, so looks like I got right about an 1/8 right there. And that's driven by how high these bars are up off the deck, so to speak. Alright, so it's all back together, fits nicely. There's a few adjustments. I need to shorten these set screws, probably on especially that one over there, and maybe make a notch here for the screw, but build the ram clamp assembly, and that'll be the next big thing. So thanks for watching, everybody. I hope this was interesting and enjoyable, and I will certainly keep you posted.